Good morning. It's a privilege to be here. Mayor Denise, thank you for having me to Singapore, this part of Singapore. My friend Hong Hui is the most organized person I know, and she was instrumental with three agencies in getting me here. And so I'm delighted to be here. I love coming to Singapore to eat and to spend time with the people, but they make me work too. Today I would like to talk to you in some ways as a caregiver. Now, I can't actually talk about my family without getting emotional, so you'll just have to look at some pictures. This is Kirsten when she was born with multiple congenital anomalies, my older daughter. And here are my two daughters. Kirsten is on the right, Sunny is on the left. Kirsten is hard of hearing and Sunny is hard of listening. One day, Sunny went to Vanderbilt University where I was a professor, and she came home at the weekends to do laundry and get money. And she was taking an Introduction to Abnormal Psychology course at Vanderbilt University. And when Kirsten was younger, the older daughter, like many caregivers, we went looking for causes for her disability. And she's one of those many children who has disabilities of unknown etiology, meaning who knows why she is the way she is. And so Sunny came home one weekend and said, "I know what's wrong with Kirsten." Well, we don't talk about what's wrong with Kirsten, but anyway, that's fine. And so being a university student, especially a university student at Vanderbilt University, she of course knows everything. And so she said, yes, I know what's wrong with Kirsten. She has charge syndrome. And we said, no, she doesn't. We've already looked into that. Charge syndrome, charge is an acronym, and each of the letters stands for a different disorder. And we had looked into it, and Kirsten didn't have all of the disorders and wasn't severe enough in some of them back in the day. Well, they've changed the criteria. And my little know-it-all 20-year-old actually turned out probably to be accurate. But by the time we got this diagnosis from our younger daughter, we didn't care anymore, because by this time I had realized that for my daughter and for all other people in the world, I don't care what the diagnosis is. I care about what they can do and what they can't do, what they like and what they don't like. And unfortunately, I don't know if this is true in Singapore, but in the United States, the diagnosis is necessary to get help. And so there is a function for it, but it does not define the person. This is Kirsten just about a year ago with me, obviously with me. Kirsten, I hate to tell her age. She's going to turn 40 2 days after Christmas, and that sort of ages me. So, but you should see my old wife. Today I'm going to talk about maybe some of these things. When children learn, learning opportunities at home, school, and the community, 4 parenting activities that are supported by a lot of evidence, 1 teaching method that works across lots of children, routines, and tasks, and how early intervention has changed. So when do children learn? Now, over the last 2 weeks, I've been working with SPD First and AWA this past week, and all the people who I've trained now know what the white space is. The white space has become familiar to people. Here we see 7 things. What do you suppose those represent? Days of the week. And I hope you really are full of admiration for my software design skills. Graphic design. What I have hashed out on the sides here are the asleep time. Now, first understand that my area of expertise, supposed expertise, is children up to age 6. And so children under age 6 get about 10 hours of sleep a night. So this is that sleep time. What do you suppose this time here is? Those are 3 epic visits for 2 or 2.5 hours. And so, that isn't the only service delivery model there is. Children can have different kinds of services. The point is that most services are not taking up a lot of time in the child's day. So what is the white space? The white space is where the child is when we're not serving him or her and the child's awake. Look how much there is. So the child is learning more in the white space than anywhere else. Little kids with disabilities, little kids, don't generalize very well. And so whoever is spending the most time with children has the most influence over that child's learning, development, and growth. So that's who has the white space. Who are the adults who are there when the child's not being treated in early intervention, not receiving services, and when the child's awake? It is some kind of caregiver. So that's where the child is learning in that time. Here's a quotation I like. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So for a long time, we've had this sort of blame the victim type of mentality that if a child is not functioning well, we've got to teach that child. Well, wait a minute now. That's fixing the flower. It's an option for us, but children don't function devoid of context. Children function in everyday life. So let's look at this a little bit more. The goodness of fit. We have the ability, the demands of a routine. So that is what is necessary for a child to participate meaningfully in, let's say, breakfast time. You have to be able to get into the eating area, kitchen, or whatever it is. You have to be able to get on a seat. You have to be able to sit there. You have to be able to pick up a utensil. You have to be able to get food into your mouth. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to get grab a cup, drink, etc. Those are the demands of a routine. That's what people do when they're participating at breakfast time. What if the child doesn't have the abilities to do some of those things, or doesn't have the interest to do it? Well, when they do have the abilities and interests, functioning is going well. Where they don't have some abilities or interests, that's where functioning decreases. It's about the interaction of the demands of the routine and the abilities and interests of the child. It isn't just about the child. So we have three choices when functioning isn't working all that well. We can change the child. I don't mean switch the child out for a better one. I mean teach the child. We can change the child, we can change something about the demands of the routine, or the thing we often forget is we can change our expectations. How many people in here have their own children? Raise your hand if you have a child. How many of you have ever had to pick your battles in raising your child? All of your hands should go up, otherwise you would be in a mental institution somewhere if you didn't pick your battles. So we know that picking your battles or changing your expectations is also a viable alternative. So when professionals are working with caregivers and they see that caregivers are not attending to something, we should not be so quick to judge. The caregivers are probably managing as best they can and may have chosen not to pick that battle. The kid will be okay. So how do children learn? Well, they learn through repeated interactions with the environment distributed over time. They don't learn so well in massed trials. I'm talking about young children. So let's take, I'll tell you about my golf lessons. I play golf, and I'm not very good at it, so I should take more lessons. If I take a golf lesson, I hit balls repeatedly, and every stroke that I take is a learning trial. So it's massed trials. Because I'm an adult, I can get feedback from all of those massed trials. Also, the pro can tell me, like a coach, he can tell me what to do differently. And then I can go on Sunday mornings, which is how I spend my time, and transfer all of that information to my Sunday morning game, because I'm an adult of average intelligence. So Little kids have great difficulty doing that. So it is always amazing to me why we would ever have a professional working with a young child with the caregiver out in the waiting room. That makes no sense at all. That is expecting the child to be able to transfer that information to a natural setting. Maybe the professional doesn't care about a natural setting, because some professionals only care about what the child will do right in front of them. They monitor the progress right in front of them. How does that help the caregiver? So what we're really interested in is children's functioning in their everyday lives, at home, school, and community. So we have, these say home visits. They don't have to be home visits. By the way, it'll be a great day in Singapore when families of young children with disabilities can get ongoing home visits. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But this is a visit anywhere. Well, between the visits, we have family-child interactions and other learning opportunities. And that's where the child learning happens, between the visits. So one of the one-liners in our model is all the intervention occurs between visits. All the intervention for the child occurs between the visits to the professionals. Unless a child is in a day-long classroom program of some kind. So here are some of the other one-liners from our model. Children learn from their parents, whether you want them to or not. And you can actually substitute the word parents for caregivers as maybe a more appropriate term given this event, but also given the Singaporean context, where many children are spending more time with a domestic worker, a domestic helper, than they are with their parents during the week, for example. So they're learning from those people too. Whoever is spending a lot of time with the child is teaching that child. Children are learning from the adults in their environment. Lev Vygotsky discovered this in the early 20th century. John Dewey also knew that. Whoever is spending time with the child is teaching the child. Parents are competent adults. I was in a meeting a few days ago where somebody said, maybe we should have a rule in an EPIC classroom where we tell the caregivers they can't be on their phones. I know the meaning. This is a place where caregivers actually were in the classrooms anyway. And I knew the sentiment behind this is because we're really trying to help caregivers when they're there. But they're grown-ups. We don't make rules for them. It's like in home visits in the United States, some people try to tell the parents to turn off the television when the home visitor goes to the home. It's their home. They're adults. So if a person is competent enough to be in charge of the child, we treat that person like an adult, not like a child. I don't care what their status is, whether it's a helper or a parent, they're adults. We treat them like adults. And by the way, adult learning theory is different from child learning. Child learning, you know, is called pedagogy. Adult learning is called andragogy. It's a different way of teaching people. Parents are not children, and they learn differently. That was the point I just made. So the learning opportunities at home. I have written an instrument for measuring children's functioning in their everyday routines. It's called the Measure of Engagement, Independence, and Social Relationships. And it's organized by routines. And so here you see fairly common, at least in the United States and actually many other countries, fairly common home routines. We don't have shower time. We have bath time. There's a cultural difference. What else? Yeah. Okay. And so we are thinking that children's learning happens in all of these areas. And in this instrument, I wanted to show you how many skills you actually have the opportunity to teach in any given routine. And I'm going to take meal times as an example. Here we start from infancy through 12 months. It's going to go all the way up to 36 months. This is just the 36-month, the birth to 3 instrument. So we have, in babyhood, opening mouth when caregiver gives bottle or breast for nursing, sucking strongly enough when nursing or bottle feeding, drinking appropriate amount from bottle or when nursing. So you can see all those newborn things. Up through 12 months, bringing spoon to mouth, eating some of the food from it. Here we go, saying no with meaning, all the way up to removing easy wrappers or peels before eating, for example, a sliced orange peel. Right up to the last one, having the fork controlled to stab, dip in sauce, and get to mouth. 47 skills. Now, a child of a given age wouldn't necessarily have all of those skills. If it's a baby, he's only going to have the early skills. But by the time he's 36 months old, he might have 47 functional skills at meal times. That's just meal times. There are all the other times of the day. Think about the number of things that caregivers are teaching their children or have the potential to be teaching their children. Teaching happens all day long. What is it about home routines? What we're interested in figuring out is for caregivers to pay attention to children's engagement. How meaningfully are they participating at this time of the day? Is the child just sitting over there basically doing nothing, or is the child actually participating? And participation can involve joining the adult in what the adult is doing. So if the adult is folding clothes, we'll call that folding clothes time. And is the child actively participating? Or are we making the child stay over on the side so the adult can just do it? What a wasted opportunity that would be not to have the child participate in that activity. So in every time of the day, almost everything that an adult can be doing can be done with the child, so the child is engaged as opposed to non-engaged. Second, working on independence. This is we have to be culturally sensitive here because is the definition of a good Singaporean caregiver to do things for her child? It might be. So then you might not be promoting independence, and that's your business, because one of our one-liners in the model also is, whose child is it? So I might want to promote independence in a young child, but I'm not the child's parent. But the caregivers get to make that decision. The third area is social relationships. This is really important because social relationships covers communication and getting along with others. So it includes appropriate behavior, and it includes being able to communicate by talking, signing, using pictures, whatever the system is. And you know they're very related. Children who don't communicate well often have behavior problems. Children who have behavior problems are often poor communicators. So communication is important. And we don't call it language here. We don't even call it communication. We call it social relationships, because the purpose for language is to have social relationships. The purpose of communication is to be able to have social relationships. We don't care what a child can do with a speech-language therapist in a speech therapy room. That isn't life. We care about how a child can communicate in his home life, in his school life, and in his community life. What everyone else is doing is also important. So if I were trying to help a caregiver with being a really effective caregiver during the home routines, I would want to know what everyone else in the home is doing. Because very often in early intervention and in special education, the professionals think only about the client child. Well, there may be other children there too. So a mother or a helper is not just dealing with the one kid with a disability. She might be dealing with a number of kids at that time. Or there may be more than one adult there. There may be a mother and a helper and a child and another child. All of those people form the ecology, the environment for that routine. And when you're helping people, you have to understand what that environment is. And then we're interested in whether people who are with the child in these different times of the day, also called routines, are happy with how that routine is going. And so we have a process that we use called the routines-based interview, which is the way we help caregivers, particularly parents in this instance, choose the goals for their children. Professionals in my model do not choose goals for children. If you're a professional and you want to choose the child's goals, you have to go down to the adoption agency and start filling out adoption papers. Whose child is it? And caregivers with sufficient support are actually able to make extremely good decisions about what they want their child to be able to do. So this routines-based interview is about asking about the details of the child's functioning during each time of the day and about what the family is doing. So that has posed an interesting question for us when we're working in Singapore. In the rest of the world, we're always interviewing parents. In Singapore, sometimes the person who is actually spending a lot of time in the daily routines is a helper. And so we are trying to figure out whether or how the helper can be part of that routines-based interview, since she is the one who's actually going to then be intervening with the child. Because remember, all the intervention occurs between visits. It happens in the white space. So the value of the times of the day. This is where life happens. Life happens in the home, community, and school routines if the child goes to school. Skills out of context are immaterial. We want children to have skills, making them meaningful participants in everyday activities, and caregivers teach in everyday activities. Forget lessons, work time, and exercises. Those are taking things that some professional has given you and doing it out of context. The child doesn't learn very well out of context. So if you're working on communication, where you want the child to be a functional communicator, you want him to be able to put 3 words together, if that's what level he is, and you want him to be able to speak clearly. We don't sit down with him for an hour and work on language. We work on that all through the day when communication is needed, because that's where here's a technical term, discriminative stimuli occur. It's where the things that the things that are interesting for the child to talk about happen through the day, not sitting down with an adult with flashcards, for example. Children will get more intervention if you spread it out in naturally occurring routines. That's what I was just talking about. So here are more one-liners from the RBM. The routines-based model is called. Oh, I've told you about that one. It's about goodness of fit. Remember the 2 circles overlapping? Who spends 15 hours a week or more with the child? They influence child learning and functioning. We've been interested in the research of the influence of the home, and even for children in full-time childcare, the home is influential. So even if a child goes to a 7 to 7 preschool or childcare program, the home influence is still very influential. There's something about home. It isn't just about where you spend the most time, but even children who go to a 7 to 7 program are still spending more than 15 hours a week with white space. Do the calculations, you'll figure it out. Especially the quality of mothering behavior. So the quality of mothering at 6 months, so they only looked at mothers, as often happens in research, at 6 months predicted child outcomes. At 6 months, the quality of mothering, at 6 months of age of the child, the quality of the interactions with the mother predicted child outcomes. So that tells you that even from a very, very early age, how we interact with children is critically important. So what can we do at home? Consider each part of the child's day. Ask ourselves, who's caring for the child? Because that person is a child's teacher, whether you like it or not. How can that person help the child participate meaningfully at that time of the day? How can the child be independent? And how can that child have social relationships, communicate and get along with others? For each time of the day, and remember that long list, those blue pictures that I had of all the routines of the day? There are many of them, and some are repeated. There are 3 meals, not just one. There's more than one playtime. So there are many, many routines in the day. Zillions of learning opportunities happen in a day. So learning opportunities at school, in Singapore, we have to pay attention to an interesting phenomenon, the culture of pre-academic skills. The culture of pre-academic skills in the preschool years butts up against the evidence of play-based learning. In fact, there is very little research that pre-academic instruction of children is successful in the long run, and yet it's a cultural norm here. And there's a lot of evidence that play-based learning is successful. So I'm not about to change Singapore. I think Singapore is doing perfectly okay as it is, except possibly in the education of young children with disabilities. That's still a question, I think. Did you know that in Finland, which scores higher than Singapore on the international tests, they don't teach children to read until age 7? So I'm just saying that there are alternatives. So look at all the classroom routines, all the types of classroom routines. This is from an instrument we have called the Clamizer, the classroom measure of engagement, independence, and social relationships. So we do the same thing for teachers. We show all the many, many skills that are available to assess and to teach in classroom routines, beyond just the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. So the important information is, what are the demands of each time of the classroom day? What's my child's engagement like in the different classroom routines? Independence and social relationships. You see the pattern here. And then, how well is this time of day working for my child? Note the way we ask that question. How well is this time of day working for my child? We're not asking, how well is my child doing at this time of day? It's about the environment as well as the child. So preparing for the subsequent environment, is the name of those letters PLSE? PSLE, that way around, yeah. Did you know that Singaporeans use more initials than any other country in the world? This is my informal assessment of Singapore. So there are all kinds of high-stakes things, and one of them I've realized with children with disabilities is that many, young children with disabilities, is that many parents are already worrying about where the child's going to be placed. Is the child going to be ready for mainstream preschool, primary 1, or mainstream, or should the question be, is mainstream preschool ready for my child? That's the way it should be. And I hope that your legislation here is not very good around supporting children with disabilities in mainstream or inclusive environments. Because if I understand it correctly, children have the right to go to a school, or caregivers have the right to send their child to a regular school, but the school doesn't necessarily have to provide any services in that school, because they're already putting all their resources into the SPED schools. So that's where our legislation in the United States is fortunate that any child can go to any public school, and the public school must provide free and appropriate education, it's called. Free and appropriate public education, FAPE, in the school, in the neighborhood school. Just because they do crazy stuff in primary 1, does that mean we should do crazy stuff in preschool? So many people think that we need to start preparing children to succeed in primary 1. Well, if we do that, we're going to have non-engagement. Because a lot of the things that children have to do in a very structured academic environment is going to be non-engaging for young children, especially if they have disabilities. So in our model, we don't do that. We say, listen, if you're going to teach that crazy stuff where you have to sit there and wait and stand in line, or everybody go through the cafeteria together like that, all those primary 1 skills, let the primary 1 people teach those skills. Don't make us do it. Engagement philosophy is we don't waste time. All time that we have children in a classroom is precious. We're not going to waste it. I'm going to speed through this. Well, maybe I shouldn't. This is Singapore. So developmentally appropriate practices, that's play-based learning and teaching, and academics, which is a Singaporean obsession. So the thing that's important to know is they're not mutually exclusive. So over the past 2 weeks, we have set up classrooms to show that you can actually play with children and teach them things that are what some people would call academic. You can teach them about letters and about numbers and about counting, about using good language and so forth. All of that can happen in the context of play, and the children are more engaged. Okay, you'll follow this logic here a second. The academics, which are sometimes called the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, and state early childhood standards. In the United States, we have those, like a curriculum, things that every child is supposed to know by the age of 5 or 6. 5. They can be addressed through play. There should be a balance of teacher-led and child-led activities. We have been working to take some classrooms in Singapore and increasing the amount of time that's child-led, because more teaching can happen in the child-led activities than in the adult-led activities. Teacher-led can plan for academics. The child-led, we go looking for academics when we watch children play and follow their lead. So either way, engagement is key. Engagement is a child meaningfully participating. So follow this logic now. Without engagement, child won't learn academics or anything else. You cannot learn if you're not engaged. Okay? So how do you get young children engaged? Play. Some people call it play as the work of childhood. Play is how children best learn. It's fun, interesting, and active, so it's a necessary component for learning. Community opportunities. This is just a long list of them. Obviously, you can't see them because it's very small, but this guy Dunst, I worked with him for 5 years, and he's remained a colleague of mine. He's very famous in early intervention, and he found that there were all of these different community activities, setting events. Community activities is what he called them. So there's lots in communities. I really like this picture here. So how come I get adaptive leisure skill and fine motor skill therapy and you just get to play? So we're always trying to make play useful for children and not pull them out of natural early childhood experiences for the sake of giving them some specialization. We need to make the specialized information applicable to children's lives, their routines. So the question is, what's in your community? One of the activities we do with families is we'll locate on a map. And for you young people, you might be interested to know that there used to be these pieces of paper that you could unfold. They were about this big, and that was what a map used to look like. So, of course, nowadays we do it on devices with Google Maps and so forth. And so you locate where a person lives, and then you look sort of in concentric circles, literally what is in my community, within walking distance. In Singapore, you've got such a great MRT system, you can really expand what's around. And we're talking about opportunities for the child to be engaged and have fun outside of the home. So that's why we talk about home, school, and community. Now I'm going to talk about the 4 parenting activities that are based in strong evidence and that we should always look for opportunities to do with our children if we're caregivers, caregivers of any kind. One is, this is the 30 million word gap that showed that children in poverty hear a lot fewer words by the time the child is age 3 than do children from professional families. That's that gap there. This is just over 1 day, but when it's extended over the birth to 3 period, it's 30 million words fewer heard by children in poverty than children from professionals. And what do you think the language scores are and other developmental scores between these 3 groups? That's children in poverty, children in middle class, and children from professional families. The developmental and language scores are just like that too. In other words, amount of words heard is predictive of children's functioning, especially their communication functioning, by age 3. So we need adults talking to children. Lots of talking. Children need to hear lots of words, especially positive words. Unfortunately, poor children heard a lot of negative words, which was also that meant that they were at a double disadvantage. Fewer words, and a higher proportion of those words were negative. So lots of positive words with young children. Next thing is reading to children. And no, I said it wrong. It's not reading to children, it's reading with children. Because good reading with little kids is called shared book reading. A fancy word for it is dialogic book reading. So we teach children to love the books. We can read the words on the books, but you see how she's holding it. And we talk to children about what's on the page. It becomes a whole event in and of itself. And this causes children to love reading, love books. Later on, when they're older, they actually like the story, and they can even predict what comes next and tell you the next line of it. That's a bit older. When we first begin, we're having fun with books. The third parenting activity that is strongly evidence-based is playing with children. Now, this is an example of playing with children, but the research also shows that it's about being playful with children. When you're just doing shower time, making it into a fun activity, being playful with children, that gets children engaged, and it helps with the relationship between the child and the adult. So being playful is very important. By the way, this is my daughter with her daughter, my granddaughter. I caught them in one good moment. And the one teaching method I want to tell you about is incidental teaching. This looks a little complicated, but it's really just you get a child engaged, so busy doing something or interested in something. You follow the child's lead, you get the child to do more, and you make sure it was fun. Now, getting the child to do more can be a little complicated sometimes. That's what all this junk over here is. But this is what people who are naturally good with children do, actually. They'll see what a kid's interested in, join the child in that play, and get the kid to do different things to keep the child interested. And so many of you are probably already using incidental teaching without even knowing it. Sometimes we help people be more focused, especially around this third step, getting the child to do more. Because just getting the child and following his lead, but not getting him to do more, isn't really teaching. Incidental teaching can occur with any goal, in any child, with any child in any routine. It's very, very versatile. That's why all caregivers should have access to this information. You can Google it and see good and bad examples of it on the internet. So my message is teach well and teach often. And follow kids' leads and get them to do more. So how early intervention has changed is that in the traditional old model of doing things, it was a medical or a rehabilitation model where we focused on the skill deficit rather than on functioning. We only changed the child, that is, treated the child, and it was direct hands-on by professionals. In the 21st century, early intervention is following a routines-based model. It's one of the models. The best one is mine. Focus on functioning in all of the models. Goodness of fit idea that the child functions in context, not in a jar. And using collaborative consultation with caregivers. They're adults, so we collaborate with them. We don't just give them suggestions and recommendations. So 21st century early intervention is consultative versus prescriptive. It occurs throughout the day by caregivers rather than being sporadic visits to a professional or from a professional. Caregiver mediated versus professionals direct hands-on. Caregiver mediated. We build caregivers' capacity versus maintaining the status and control in professionals. Our job as professionals should be to release any expertise or information we have to the people who really need it, and that is the caregivers of the children. And this is my little Singapore add-on, we're empowering domestic helpers to be active interventionists with children. And that's all I know. Thank you very much.